Roll call, please. Ms. Talbot?
Mr. Borrowy,
Present.
Mr. Jinks, Ms. Nichols,
Here.
Chairman Orris,
Here.
Ms. Pavano is here, Mr. Slocum,
Here.
Mr. Talbot,
Here.
Mr. Veliber,
Here.
and Mr. Walsh. We have a quorum of the council.
Great, thank you, Ms. Talbot. Can we all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Mr. Walsh says he should be on in a minute. And with that, I guess we'll move to the item number 3, which is adoption of fiscal year 2021 5-year capital expenditure plan and annual capital expenditure budget. Mr. Borrowy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tonight is the conclusion of a long road of review of our capital budget, the 16 items recommended by the town manager that we've had meetings to review during the operating budget time, and then also last week. And tonight, hopefully an opportunity to move this forward for the community. I want to thank the staff for their professionalism. I want to thank the council members for their participation. I had an opportunity to talk to each one of us council members, either individually or emails or both, with regard to thoughts on this. So it's well crafted with everybody's help. And with that, I'd like to run through the items as I asked the town manager to prepare, and we can talk about them and ask the budget committee if they could make a recommendation and then move it on to the full council. Mr. Chairman, is that all right with you? Okay.
I'm sorry, Dave, I was muted. Yes, it is. Thank you.
Thank you. So then the first, there were 16 items, and I think by consensus it was agreed that the 16th item that is being left off of our recommendations is the Bartlett Park expansion. I think that it was clear that the COVID situation stopped us from being able to have meaningful public participation in the planning of that. A lot of work has gone into it. It seems sad that it had to be stopped, but we didn't cause the pandemic. We're doing our best to work around it. I think leaving that item out and going with for a future date when the citizens can have more input with our town staff on that and the development of it, I think will provide us with a great addition to the park system. And quite frankly, it's a long-term issue. It's not a here and gone. It's a long-term issue, and I think waiting a little while is going to allow us to have better participation and make it a great addition to what we have there already. The other items, and I'm just going to go in order if you want to follow along, although I'm not making the motion. The other items, the technology reserve fund, it's for replacement equipment at $310,000, and it is part of a multi-year process of keeping up with our technology and the safety and security of our infrastructure and technology. Vehicle equipment is the second item, and that's for several items within the $290,000 to keep up with the maintenance of our equipment so that we don't have substandard equipment on our roads being used by our town staff completing projects. Capital planning account and business assessment. This is an account of $210,000 replenishment that will allow us the planning necessary for projects as they need some planning to get some realistic numbers and some order of magnitude for those projects. Boiler replacement at the fire station, annex, and police. This is the first multi-year to be able to make sure that our buildings are up to proper, usable, and good order. Similar with the next item 5, the HVAC and locker improvements at the police station. That's clearly a needed project. There's been a demonstrated need for that for years. The past council, led by most of you, worked on moving this forward last year, and this is one appropriation for $1.4 million that will finish the project associated with this, and it will be a referendum question too. It will be the first of our 3 referendum questions that will come out of this. The street light pole replacement, $110,000 on a semi-regular basis to replace them now that the town owns them. They do need to be kept in working order and for safety and security. It's important. Our public works dump truck and plow, this is the orderly replacement. We know how long our trucks last. We have so many divided by the number of years they're expected to last. And we usually get a little more than that out of it. And this is the time now though that these need to be replaced. And then there's public works as a separate category of non-dump truck, and it's the item number 8 is $160,000 for some of the public works that are non-dump trucks, so larger type vehicles and others. Road improvement program number 9. This is one of the subject of probably the most information that came to me in conversations and emails in request. And last year we had $1.7 million in road rehabilitation money. And this year the town manager had requested of us $2 million. But that was before the COVID situation. I don't think we're in a position that we wanted to go up with the increase. It's been suggested that we consider not having quite as much money as we had last year. I think the $1.6 million falls naturally. It clearly is a very robust plan to do 8 or 9 miles of road rehab every year. Actually 10, I think, with this. Although it'd probably be about 9 by the time we reduce it a little bit. But it's a combination of road resurfacing and some of the chip seal and the 3 different types of programs that we do for the roads. And we do need to keep up with our roads. We have very good roads. So the past town council, you guys have done a great job in keeping up with this. And this just continues that and continues it in a strong way, but very fiscally responsible way. Sidewalk improvement, we also had some comments on that and some requests that maybe this amount be higher, lower, some differences. But I think the $200,000, which it's been for a couple of years now, coupled with the fact that we're spending $386,000 on Jarvis this year to finish the extension of sidewalks in that area to tie in with the linear trail. And then next summer we'll be slated to do a Cheshire Road and tie in with Quinnipiac Park and all the little side streets off of that. I think we can then work towards a master plan to see what would come next afterward. But I think for now, the $200,000 for rehab is a good solid amount. The council has done a great job in having a robust plan for our sidewalks, and I think this continues that. Number 11, stormwater drainage disconnects. This is one of those unfun things that you kind of need to do, and we're trying to make sure that runoff from roads that has oil and other sediments doesn't get into our water supply. It doesn't get into some of the recharge areas that it shouldn't get into. And this is going to have more control over rainwater runoff and stormwater runoff. Item 12, heavy duty vehicle. This is a large, almost $400,000 replacement item for a vehicle that's used to clean out the clogs, if you will, that get in the system and other things. And quite frankly, I think the original is in 2001. By the time this actually gets on board and whatnot, it's going to be a good 20 years old. And that's past its useful life. So be rest assured that the townspeople are getting their money's worth out of the old truck and will out of this one. Item 13, roof replacement at Dodd is for a portion of Dodd that's old enough that it needs to be done and in such a condition that it needs to be done. Item 14, district sidewalk and masonry repairs. This is $125,000 for school work within the school properties, within our 7 different school properties. And item 15 is road reconstruction, Industrial Avenue. That's a difference from road resurfacing and rehab. This needs a new base. This needs solid work to be done in a big rehab. And following this will be East Johnson Avenue in another year, and then possibly Cornwall Avenue in another year, and then Scenic Court. So it isn't just industrial, it's also some of the residential streets that would need to be done. But this is important. This would be our third question on the ballot. It's $620,000. I rolled right over the second question, which would be the $1.6 million for road work. So that's a summary of what we've got. And if it's all right, I'd like to ask the budget committee what their pleasure is. If Mr. Jenks and Mr. Slocum would like to make a motion to recommend something.
I'd like to move that forward, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Mr. Jenks, do you have comments, or would you like to second that? Or oh, we can't hear you. Sorry, Ken. We can see you. Thank you. Now I think you're unmuted.
Will we be making comments before we vote as a council?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, then I second the motion, move it to the council.
Okay, thank you. Is there further budget committee comments? All right, seeing none, since you're ready to move it off to the full council, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 3 votes, so it passes unanimous. All right, Mr. Chairman, the only other item that the budget committee should review is, I think it's page 31, which is the request that the full council adopt the remaining years, which is the out years, as they're called, years 2 through 5. So it's a total 5-year plan. Those aren't actual expenditures, but they are just placeholders and ideas that this is the process that we'll be following. So I would ask what the budget committee's pleasure is for the remainder, which is page 31 motion.
I would move that forward, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Second, all right. Any further discussion on the total 5-year plan? All right, seeing none, all those on the budget committee in favor say aye or
Aye.
unanimously. All right. Our work as a budget committee is done. Mayor Orris, we would like to pass those along to you and ask you to handle it from here.
Thank you, Mr. Barr, and thank you to the Budget Committee for your hard work on this process. I'm actually going to turn it back to you, Mr. Barr, shortly, because I think before we all get into some comments regarding the budget, which we'll have an opportunity to do, we should probably get the resolution on the table. So
Okay.
if you would be so kind to get the resolution read, hopefully we'll get a second and then we'll have some dialogue about it. And we'll go from there. That would, to me, be the best process.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, be it resolved that the budget committee, that the town council approves resolution 062320-1. Be it resolved that the town council adopts the annual capital budget for fiscal years 2020 through 2021, items 1 through 15. You want me to read each item? What's your pleasure, Mr. Chairman?
I think you did it already, so I'm glad you did. I think it was important we summarize them unless Arnett or Sean thinks you need to do it as part of the resolution. I think you already summarized it, or if any other council members request it, I'm fine if you don't, as long as it complies, since you already summarized it.
Well, I would only ask that in his summary, he hasn't mentioned, the bonding sort of language. I'm not certain that has to be read, but if we could accept that it's been read, maybe that's a way to get around it. But this is actually the resolutions allocating the monies and how they're going to be paid for, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So what's the necessity?
Are you comfortable that bond council is going to accept that we move the resolution that's numbered and referencing the bond? I think the language. Okay, that's why we numbered them. So I think that helps.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think you're fine.
Are you satisfied, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, I'm fine with it unless someone has an issue. The only reason I am good with it is because you did summarize them. But
Right.
if someone feels we need the full context, I'm okay if you want to go through the process. But in an effort to save you a lot of reading, I'm sure we're going to have some dialogue on this anyway. So I'm completely comfortable unless I hear other objections.
4 items that are not bonded.
Okay.
Then I will second the resolution.
Great, thank you, Mr. Slocum. And with that, Mr. Barry, I'll turn it back to you if you want to have any additional conversation about the budget, and then certainly we'll open it up for dialogue from members of the council.
Just briefly, I would like to bring to everybody's attention that the council has been very judicious in being careful with the bonding. It was a $12.1 million recommendation. We cut it in half to $6.1 million. And we've also, the net cost is going to be even less than that because there's $1 million that we put in the operating budget for capital non-recurring. And 4 of these items, number 1, the technology, $310,000. Number 2, the vehicle replacement at $290,000. Number 3, the capital planning account replenishment at $215,000. And number 4, the $110,000 boiler replacement are all going to be paid for with cash, because we put that in the operating budget. So those are items that will not add to our bonded indebtedness and will continue to help drive, keep a reasonable bond rate. And I do believe this plan is a good balance of all the needs of the community. It hits different departments, it covers different departments. that have needs. It covers the town in general. And I think the public expects us to have a well-run community and decent facilities that all can use. And I think this continues us going in that direction in a manner that doesn't overburden us with taxes. And when these start hitting the debt service in another year or two, when we go out for the bonds and start having to pay debt service on it, it's not going to be an undue burden. As a matter of fact, I don't think because of the amount we cut it down to, it's probably going to be a balance for what's getting paid off over that time period. So we really are in solid shape this year with regard to the capital plan. And I wholly support this, and I encourage my fellow council members to do that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barry. At this point, I'll open it up for questions or comments from members of the council. Anybody? Mr. Walsh?
First, I want to apologize. I was having computer problems, and hopefully in another month we won't have this issue. But I just had a quick question. George, are you still? George is on the line, I assume, right?
Yep.
George,
I'm here.
okay. Last week, when we were discussing about the roads, I had asked you the question about, if you had any left over. You said it would go into a separate fund. Is there any money left over in that fund as of now, or is it depleted?
I can tell you in a second. There is, but I just don't know how much. Let's see.
And it may be used on Oak Avenue.
I'm just going to sand it.
I need glasses. Holy cow. We'll have some money. I guess the short answer is I've got to add up a bunch of little accounts, but we'll have some money left over at the end of this year, undoubtedly. Like I say, we usually have 30, 40, 50, up to $100,000, depending on what's going on for the year. Crack seal at the end of the year, kind of depends on where that all falls. But I can get you an exact number, but we do have a few dollars. There's several accounts that we have these things in as they kind of cascade through the years.
Yeah, I'm just curious because I mean, you were asking for 2 million, and we're going to cut it down by 400,000. But I'm hoping that if you really need it, you might have a little bit of leftover in there. But I think when we were discussing it last week, you had said it's not going to put a huge dent in the way we take care of our roads if we did drop that budget a little bit. I mean, we didn't want to drop it to the point where we're going to be playing catch up for the next 5 years. So I think where we are at 1.6 is probably the ideal place for us. So I'm gonna go along and approve that one, because I think it's important to make sure our roads are taken care of, especially with what is going on on Oak and around the town here right now. The other thing, the heavy duty truck that's being purchased for the WPC, I think it was, or the water pollution, is that something that's replacing something that just is not working now, or is it just aged, or is it?
Sure, it is replacing a 2001 truck that we currently have in the inventory that functions, but it's just showing its age. And the biggest thing is it needs to be reliable because of those emergency issues. We have 15 or 20 times a year it gets called out kind of in an emergency situation to clear sewer mains before the sewage backs up into people's basements or into business or so. And nothing good from sewage comes with a backup, that's for sure. So it's got to be reliable, and it's got to get out there and at a moment's notice and be.
No, listen. If I had the sewage backup in my house, I'd want you out there in less than a second. so I get that. I just want to make sure that it's something that, if we put it off a year, would it be something that could cause more damage than good? Or if we have to do it this year, then we put it through. I mean, I just wasn't sure the condition of the current truck.
Sure, it's operable. It does operate. It's just it's showing its age. It's had several repairs in the recent past that it's needed parts and kind of where it has to go out and get pieces repaired or adapters or different things. And it's just rusting out like they
Just an
do
older-
over the years.
Yeah,
and
it's
that
an
kind
older,
of
it's a
stuff.
19-year-old vehicle, so I get
Correct,
it.
correct.
All right. I appreciate that, the input. Thank you, George. That's
Sure.
all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. And I just to kind of expound on the one statement you made about the road paving budget. Remember, as the budget is currently proposed, that we'll be putting $2.2 million into road paving. We've just pulled $600,000 out to be specific to Industrial Avenue, which is an industrial commercial road, which needs a more thorough reconstruction, as George has told us. So, just from the public's edification, while we're cutting that one line item, we're actually spending a little bit more in total than what we have in the past. So I think that's important to note. So, yeah, George, you have something to say on that?
Yeah, if I could just take 2 seconds, I can assure you the 1.6 will put to good use. It won't materially affect the road ratings in Cheshire. We'll still get 10-ish miles of doing treatments on these roads. So appreciate the council's support on that, and hopefully the voters in November. But it won't cause Cheshire's road system to degrade appreciably. I'll say that.
Thank you, Mr. Nawatney. Yes, Mr. Slocum?
Just a quick question. First of all, I think the 1.6 is a good number, and I think it'll do the job. But a question, I know we did a substantial part of Mountain Road. I don't know if it was last year or the year before. We used some, well, maybe it wasn't that. That was probably South Brooksville Road. That LoTSIP funding, is that gone? Is that not available for the towns any longer?
It still is available. We've been trying to tee up that kind of bridge down on Mount Sanford and another part of South Brooksville.
Okay.
What's up to that? So
Gotcha.
that's been our focus, I guess, for that money. But
Okay.
we've been fortunate to get almost $2 million in that kind of LoTSIP funding for between South Brooksville and Mountain over the past 3-4 years. So the town's been very fortunate to have that opportunity to get the money, and we'll continue to try to seek those out.
Okay. Thank you, George.
That's a question.
Ms. Nichols, and then we'll go to Mr. Jinks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. I will be supporting this as we have presented it. I think we've worked very hard. I think the Budget Committee has presented us with good information. And I support all of the things that we have agreed upon, because I think it's important to maintain an even maintenance of things that we have. We're not adding anything that is not just as part of a good plan that we've established over the last few years. The one thing I do want to comment about, and for the residents who have been very active in supporting whatever happens to Bartlam Park, I too am interested in how that's going to happen, and I believe everybody on the council is. But we have seen the results in past years, over the years, of moving too quickly on large projects and sometimes not thinking them through carefully. So in my opinion, when we were deciding this budget, it was one of the factors that came to my mind when we agreed to put that off for another year. I think it's important for the residents to have input. And although that was planned, unfortunately, like a lot of other things, it didn't happen. So I think it's really important to push it off. And I don't believe that, I can't speak for everybody on the council, but I don't believe it is because we are not in favor of doing something with that project, but we are in favor of doing it in a logical manner with input from the residents. So just to make sure that all those people who worked so hard on it don't feel that we're just ignoring their hard work. That to the contrary, we really want to make sure that whatever plan we decide has the input from the residents.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols. Mr. Jinks?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So first of all, a question to maybe to George or Sean about the sidewalk project on Jarvis. Isn't that a state grant funded program, or is there town dollars coming out of it for that as well?
Largely state. That the town is doing some work in there, but by far the bulk of it is state dollars.
Okay, all right. And then David, Barbara, you had mentioned in your earlier comments about as far as the sidewalks go, us working on sort from here forward, working on kind of a master plan for sidewalks. It isn't something that was raised last week. I don't know, is that kind of a decision that was made in the interim or something? It's a good development. I just wanted to kind of confirm that's what we were thinking.
It's a comment that somebody said to me when I was talking, and I honestly can't remember which council member. Obviously, it wasn't you, I guess. But it was somebody else. Actually, maybe it was Mr. Talbot. I can't remember because I actually had an opportunity to speak to all of you. And we thought that we should revisit what the plan is for sidewalks, just the way we have the roads are set up. And the roads are rated,
Right.
rated what can be done when. And I know the council has in the long-term past and the recent past reviewed areas to see where connections need to be made so that there's not closed loops, but we're looping things together around parks and busy areas. But it's worth another look, and it's worth another development of a multi-year plan if that's what comes out of it. But I think we'll spend some of the interim between capital budgets taking a look at sidewalks. So we may find that we do have a good plan for what's going on, but I just need to be made aware of what it is.
Well, and if I can jump in on that as well, David, and I think you did a good job explaining it, but to understand, we have had structure to this program already, and we can certainly use more in line of a rating system, I guess, relative to how we've done the streets. But we have a plan of conservation and development that just speaks to the advancement of sidewalks where we can connect neighborhoods to busy areas, whether it be downtown, schools, etc. So our plan of extending new sidewalks with the money that we've been appropriating as a council, which I think we've been generous with, and we recognize the importance of doing it, has been following that plan to the best of our ability. Now, we've had some resistance in some places that we've tried to do it by some residents. As you all know, we had Lanyon Drive, which I still believe is an area that could use sidewalks because it connects a large area to schools and to the main shopping areas and restaurants, etc. But obviously, we need to do that in a way that's palatable to the neighborhoods that we're going through. And we just could not get that done appropriately to meet everybody's needs. So I think we have a good plan in place. We can always do it better. And I'm certainly supportive of having a more structured look at how we advance sidewalks. But I think it would be very unfair if anyone is suggesting that councils haven't looked at the sidewalk issue. I think these councils have been very, and even prior to my terms, been very supportive of advancing new sidewalks where appropriate, and obviously having an ongoing maintenance program. So it does exist.
Just to expand upon that, I think West Main comes to mind, especially the West Main project, which again was helpfully supported with steep grants. That really assisted us with sidewalk connectivity on both sides. And so there are efforts ongoing with that. And of course, they're all expensive. So like Rob says, I think a programmatic approach has been in place, but perhaps as Mr. Barry suggested, a more programmatic one may be useful as a roadmap for us.
Mr. Jenks?
Thanks. Yeah, I didn't mean to suggest that we didn't have any kind of a plan in place. I'm generally in favor of this capital budget, and I think we have a lot of items in here that need to be taken care of. Certainly, I thought I made a reasonable proposal last week of suggesting that we move some of the requested dollars for road resurfacing into a little bit more of it into sidewalks. Now, I still would wish that we had done that, but I understand. At least going forward, I hope that we can maybe take even more of a to use Tim's term, programmatic approach and fill in some of the gaps that we have. I'll certainly be looking to want to do that in years ahead. So I'm like I said, I'm in favor of this budget. I do think the road surfacing budget where it is now, or the spend now, is probably, it's a good number. I do think the roads are in good shape. We could perhaps reduce that number a little bit more and maybe move a little bit of that in the sidewalks. But obviously there isn't a support for that to do that this year. But like I said, I hope that going forward we could perhaps look at doing more of filling in the gaps of in the through streets. I can think of several not too far from where I am right now that could stand to have some sidewalks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jenks. Yeah, Tim, let me get Ms. Pavano in here.
Yep.
Sandy?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just want to say, as a new member of the council, I think you've done an outstanding job on this budget. It's very fiscal responsible, but yet you're dealing with all the items that need to be dealt with. Totally in favor of the 1,600 for the public works and putting the Bartland Park for the 5,600,000 to next year. You have my approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pavano. I know Mr. Slocum has a question, but I'd like to go to someone else if you don't mind
Yep.
first, Tim,
Not at all.
unless they're, I don't see anybody. No, Mr. Talbot.
Sorry, I was muted. I'll jump in and give my comments on the budget before Tim starts his questioning. I would say that first off, I will support the capital budget as presented this evening. Thanks to Mr. Kimball, Ms. Talbot, Mr. Jascott, and his entire staff. All the department heads, as always, have done an outstanding job of presenting not only the numbers but the backup to it, which makes it much easier for us to make our determinations. So thank you all again. The specifics, I was supportive of Mr. Jenks' initiative last week when he talked about the sidewalks. I guess where I fall at this point, and I was the one that had the conversation with Mr. Barowie, and George, you may want to cover your ears for this because it means more work for you, but rather than kind of come up with numbers, that, in other words, the request has been for quite some time now for $2 million for road repair, and there's kind of almost a I don't want to say a plug number, but there's a number that you ask for. And I guess I would like to see us get a little bit more strategic. First with the sidewalks and maybe then carrying into the road resurfacing. But I'd like to see kind of an overview map of the town, where we're lacking in the sidewalk department, where we could strategically place sidewalks, maybe get buy-in from the community prior to doing so, and then plugging into the capital budget a number that equaled what those neighborhood sidewalks were going to be, rather than just saying, let's give 2, let's give 3, let's give 800,000. Let's give a number on an annual basis that represents what we're going to be doing, and then sticking with that. I would echo what Ms. Nichols said on the Bartlam South property. Unfortunately, I think that property was a victim of some timing. The John Gawlak in the Parks Department were just at the point where they were ready to kind of roll out the plans and get buy-in from the community on this, and then we got hit with the global pandemic, and understandably so, that project screeched to a halt. So we've also always talked on the capital side and these things, and even on the operating side, we've talked about nice to haves and must haves. I'm a little more encouraged with the fact that Bartlam South is getting quite a bit of use as a passive property right now, with the walking trails and everything else. So that gives me a little more comfort that we're not jumping in to develop that right away. But I would agree with Ms. Nichols that we don't want to jump in and just put a development in there for for the sake of developing that property. Let's do it right. Let's do it. We went through the whole consultant route, and we've got some great plans and some great ideas. Let's get the community's buy-in before we go ahead. So those are my thoughts on the capital budget, which I will support this evening. And I thank you as always, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Talbot. And Mr. Slocum, before we get to I'm sorry, but I know you had a couple of chances. I want to try to get people who haven't spoken yet. Mr. Veliver, trust me, Tim, we'll get back to you.
Oh, no, mine's just a question.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I agree. In looking at this capital budget, I think this is a well-balanced capital budget. I think we cover a lot of areas, and we do it in a very, I think a very thoughtful and prudent manner. We've provided for a lot of the things that need to be provided for. And I agree with Sylvia on her thoughts, and also Peter with Bartlam Park South. I think because of timing, it's been it's something that we're pushed to a future year, but it's definitely something that we as a council are all very thoughtful of. We're very engaged in doing what we think is going to be the best for this. That's why we had the consultant. It's unfortunate that right when the consultants were about to give their presentation on the plans and the options that were going to happen, we ran into COVID and everything sort of came to a stop. But we're going to pick that back up again and have an opportunity for people to really continue to engage in developing that property with the council and seeing what we can do to make that as best a property as it can be. I think with the timing, we need to put a lot of thought into that. It's going to be a big project, but it's also going to be really a key focal point of Cheshire once that is done. That is going to be, it's going to be an important thing. And as Peter said, one of the things that's really nice is that property is currently being used for passive recreation. But I know the people who use it for that are actually, now that they use it, are hoping that we manage to maintain some of that passive recreation into the property going forward. They really enjoy having that kind of a trail and the use of that property. So I am excited for the opportunities at Bartlam Park, but as well as the opportunity for the feedback of people as we go forward, because it is such a big project. We do need feedback, and we want as much feedback as possible. I'm glad that, as I said, we look at this budget. I'm okay with the idea of having the roads budget be at 1.6 million. I think that's a good number. And as George mentioned, these are things that we can work with to maintain our road system in town. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will be supporting this capital budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Veliver. Mr. Slocum.
First a question, then I'll give you my comments on supporting the budget. The question goes to George on the sidewalks, because I know that sidewalk budget every year does include repair work that has to be done on existing sidewalks, and also driveway aprons and things of that nature. So George, could you just clarify sort of on an annual basis, what portion of this budget is really going towards those ends?
Sure. So the kind of the sidewalk budget we currently have is a little bit of a misnomer. It's really a sidewalk replacement budget. It's not designed to put in new sidewalk as it stands.
Right.
So we have 200, 250, whatever the council obviously supports. The issue we have, and I'll speak to two things. The issue we have is that there's about 107 miles of sidewalk in town. So even in our best numbers, if you replace all that at a mile and $250,000 for a mile, you can extrapolate those numbers. They get huge quickly. So we've got to kind of, much like the roads, we've got to kind of keep up with replacing the sidewalks, because they don't last 100 years or anything like that. They 30 to 50 years is about the best we can do. So if you want to dive into kind of a sidewalk enhancement program and expand them, that's great. I'd be happy to talk to you. We actually have a sidewalk rating system. It's not quite as elaborate as our road rating of good, average, problems, that kind of thing. So but we definitely have a handle on that. So anybody who wants to dive into that, we'll be happy to show you what we've got and kind of give you some good leads on the replacement part. And then we can certainly talk new installations at any time the council would like to.
Okay, thank you, George. I kind of thought that's where we were at. I guess if I may go forward, then I'm in support of the budget. I think we've delivered a decent product that folks can afford. We're also doing it at a time when money is relatively inexpensive. And even though we pay this over 20 years and we pay a lot more for it because of that, I think it's a good time to to spend the money we can spend here responsibly. To Bartlam Park, I think this would have been, in spite of COVID, not a year where we would have been advancing a $5.6 million project. I know I, for one, have always advocated for a deliberative expenditure on that property, and I'm sure my voice would have stayed much the same over this hall if we were deliberating this right now to go forward to referendum. I think even the earliest surveys, whether they were on SurveyMonkey or whatever, there was a very high respondent level that thought walking trails and things of that nature were an ideal use of that property. So not that I'm advocating that be its exclusive use at all. I don't think we're bringing any negativity to what goes forward. I think ultimately, when we actually look at this real seriously next year, we'll probably come up with, or I would certainly probably be supporting, something in the 1.5 million range or something that actually looks like we're delivering things incrementally, thoughtfully, and in a planned programmatic way, the way we've done it over the years. So that's just speaking in the future, but I think we shouldn't feel too badly that COVID came along and blew this plan out of the water, because I don't really think the plan is really behind. We get a good opportunity in the coming months to get it out there, to sell it, and learn from it. And then we'll be really sharp on this when we have to address this next year in the operating and capital budget process. So that's it from here. I'm supportive of the budget as is, and thank you for the time to speak to it.
Thank you, Mr. Slocum. And I just want to respond to George's comment on the sidewalk budget. But it's unfair to give the impression, George, that we have not allocated dollars for new sidewalk expansion. We did it with Lanyon Drive. That project didn't go for the reasons I suggested, and that money was reallocated. We've done it on Jarvis. Granted, it was state-supported money, but we took the initiative to go ahead and get it, and we took the initiative to recognize it was a safety issue there that we wanted to fix and provide access to walking trails, etc. So I don't want the community to walk away from this budget discussion to think that somehow all we care about is fixing the existing sidewalks we've got, because that's not the case. And we have supported budgets to expand sidewalks in the past, and I'm confident we'll continue to do it in the future. Mr. Jenks.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I in the case of Cheshire Street, that project is actually a new sidewalk, I believe. Is that correct, George and Sean?
Correct.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that is correct. Yeah.
So the 225 or whatever the number is that we have budgeted, that for this coming year is largely going to a new sidewalk, correct?
In year 2 in the plan, but yes, there's a proposed.
Oh, it's year 2 in the plan? Okay.
Appropriated within it.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure we were clear on that. Thanks.
Mr. Nawati?
Yeah, just to piggyback on your comment, Chairman Norris, I didn't want to give that impression that the council hasn't given money for new sidewalks, just that we spend a lot of time fixing what we have because Cheshire has such a good infrastructure of sidewalks. But just what you said, I won't belabor it, but and as Councilman Jinks just said, there's a new sidewalk plan for Cheshire Street at some point, hopefully if the residents are all good with it, and there'll be others certainly. We've just been keying on trying to keep the existing infrastructure up to snuff internally for Public Works, but certainly the council's been supportive of everything we've done and looking to do more. So I know that.
Well, and safety is always an issue, And unfortunately, as a result of, not that sidewalks would have changed the potentially this tragedy that we're just dealing with as a community. And our thoughts and prayers continue to go out with the families impacted by that. But, safety is always an issue of every council and of everyone on either side of the aisle, Republican or Democrat. So, I think we generally stand very united when we talk about making sure we're supporting endeavors that enhance safety for all of the community, especially our children. And I just want to make sure that the community recognizes that we're all in this with the same intention. So thank you. Mr. Walsh, did you have another question or comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to make one final comment on, I feel like, what we're doing here is pretty much like we did with our main budget, was being fiscally prudent. We don't know what the future is going to bring, and I would have loved to have seen some designs from what the new Bartlam is going to be, but like Ms. Nichols said, we don't want to rush into anything until we have a good plan in place. And like Mr. Slocum said, I'm hoping that it will be in phases. I don't know if we can just put $5 million into a plan. But I think over time, phasing it in would be the perfect way to go. So I'm going to support this budget as it is. I'm a little hesitant about the big truck at over $300,000, and could we have waited another year or two? But Mr. Nowotny explained that it's probably on its last legs as it is. So I will support it as stated. But I want to thank the budget committee for all they did. Mr. Bari, you did a great job in leading this budget committee, and thank you for what you did too.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. And before I make a few remarks, anybody else have any more thoughts or comments? Okay, seeing none. So I'll speak to the budget briefly, hopefully. I do support this budget wholeheartedly. I think it is an excellent balance. I think it's a necessity budget. It's not a wish list budget at all. And I think that's what it needs to be in light of the times that we're all enduring. We've made substantial cuts and made sure that we're being as efficient as we can on the operating budget side. And I wouldn't expect us to do anything different here on the capital budget. So I think this is a bare bones budget of necessities. I think we've tried to explain exactly why we're supporting the various items. I think we can all nitpick a couple of items here or there. I too looked at the large expenditure for the vac truck or jet truck or whatever we're going to call it as something maybe we didn't need this year. But when you look at the fact that the importance of that vehicle and what it does and the potential problems if it breaks down and we have clogs and we have sewage backing up, that would certainly not be acceptable and certainly would not be healthy. So the fact of whether we defer it a year or two, I think is the best we could get away with. And that doesn't solve a budget issue to me. It's either we do it this year, we do it next year. I got to tell you, I'm equally concerned or maybe more concerned about next year's budget. So when I looked at it from that perspective, I felt like, why run the risk of having that old truck break down and the problems with it, knowing that we'd have to replace it within 12 or 24 months, best case anyway. And that's not even a guarantee. So with that thought process, I'm certainly going to go ahead and support that line item. I think our paving conversation is exactly appropriate and spot on. We're doing over $2 million if the community supports both of them in referendum. I think that will continue keeping Cheshire ahead of the curve relative to maintaining good quality, safe roads, which I see a lot of communities not doing. So I think this is a necessity-driven budget. My thoughts on Bartlam Park are this. I'm very interested in advancing something at Bartlam Park, and I'm very interested in doing it sooner than later to the extent we all determine it's fiscally appropriate. So what I'm in favor of doing is advancing the final dialogue with the community to get the final design done so that this becomes shovel ready as soon as possible. And then at that point, we as a council and certainly the community with their discussion through referendum vote will decide when and if it's appropriate. But I don't think we should be delaying this, and we have not delayed it. I think it's important that the community knows we haven't. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we were not able to finalize the potential options with the community to get their final involvement. And once that was done, it would come before the full council. There are many members of this council that hasn't even seen some of the proposals. So to be honest with you, with COVID, we just never could have got it done anyway. But in saying that, I can hope that we would begin the process as soon as we can to finalize it, get it shovel ready, and then we can have an honest conversation as a group with the community as when we all deem it most fiscally prudent to do it. I think it's important that we don't shelve this, and I'm not saying anyone's advocating that, but I want to underscore that we're not looking to do it. And I thought when we had this discussion a week or so ago in our budget discussions that we all agreed, let's try to interact with the community as best we can currently through whatever venue we can to get this process reignited. I'd like to see that happen so we can get this thing shovel ready and then decide where and when we fund it. So that's my overall thoughts. I'm actually going to support this budget, and I think it is a very lean budget, and I think it appropriately so needs to be that in this current times. I want to thank all of the staff for all their hard work, Sean and Arnett and Jim and your staff, and George, I know you spent a lot of time, and obviously our public safety individuals, everybody weighed in on this, and everybody sat at the table together, putting the greater good ahead of individual department needs. And George and everyone of the department that's on here, I appreciate you doing that, because that's what this time is all about. We may all want a certain item, but at the end of the day, we all can't get what we want because of the times we're in. And I think what we see is a collaborative effort, not only on the operating budget side, but here, that we all realize that the greater good is more important than the individual needs. And that's what this budget reflects. So I thank all of the department heads who may not be getting exactly what they wanted, but I think they understand why, and they understand it's the right thing to do. So I thank everybody. Dave Barwi, I want to thank you and the budget committee. Dave, thank you for being back on the council. You did a great job. As someone who just got reelected after many years of serving, you jumped right into this budget process. To me, it went swimmingly. I thank you for your time and effort. I know you spent a lot of time and took it very seriously, as well did the rest of your budget committee. So thank you for all that hard work. You made the rest of our council work a lot easier, and I thank you for that, because we all have a lot of stuff on our plate. So that's it from my perspective. I'm certainly going to support it, and unless there's other comments or questions, I'll give one more round if there is anybody. If not, I'm going to go ahead and call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who participated in this. We'll move on to agenda number 4, approval of submission of referendum questions and authorization for explanatory text. Mr. Barwi?
Chairman, there's a second part of item 3, though, and it's the adoption of the 5-year plan as
Oh,
recommended.
yeah, my apologies. Thank you. You're right. I forgot all
Very
about that.
short motion, so I won't take a long time.
Yeah,
Be it
thank you, Mr.
resolved that the
Barwi.
town
Appreciate
council
that.
approves resolution 06-2320-2. Be it resolved that the town council adopts the 5-year omnibus capital expenditure plan for fiscal years 2021 through 2025 in accordance with the recommendation of the town council budget committee.
Second.
Mr. Barwi, thank you. Mr. Slocum, Mr. Barwi?
Mr. Chairman, this is adopting the 5-year plan. Of course, we just did the first year of the capital expenditure plan. This is really essentially adopting years 2 through 5. It's a guide, so it lets us know generally what projects are coming up, the general cost of them. It's a placeholder and order of magnitude for our infrastructure improvement program and maintenance maintenance of our infrastructure for the next 5 years. And it's a solid plan. Will it change? Absolutely. But at least it gives us an idea where we're going and general idea of dollars and cents and our priorities. So hopefully I urge the council to adopt this.
Thank you, Mr. Barwi. Any questions or comments on Mr. Slocum?
Just one comment, because we obviously did have a constituent comment on the Cornwall Avenue extension repavement process, which I believe is in year 5. And we had obviously discussed that as a council because we were asked to remove it. I do think because this is a plan going forward that's very changeable, it seemed, at least to me, and I think to the council as a whole, worthy of, staying in there. And then, George promised we can build a road without cutting down every tree, and I think that's reasonable. And we don't really have to confront it right away, but with all due respect to her concerns, that resident's concerns, I thought I should just bring that up. because it's included in our 5-year capital expenditure planning. So that was it really, and I'm supportive of the rest of the plan as well.
Thank you, Mr. Slocum. Mr. Jenks, was that a wave? No?
Yeah.
No? Good. Anybody else? Mr. Veliver?
Yes, thank you. Tim, thank you for bringing that up because I had that same concern that the resident had raised that issue. Although at this point, I don't know whether I would be supportive of that, but that's in year 5 and that's a long way away. And so this is a sort of a placeholder and something that's subject to change. And we'll have to see how that project plays out in future budgets. But overall, I'm supportive of the rest of the capital budget. Thank you.
Mr. Walsh?
I just had one quick question, and I'm not sure where it would fall under here, but seeing that the turf on the field is at 10 years old or around 10 years old, I'm assuming that this is something that's going to be needing replacement in the next 4 or 5 years, possibly. And I don't know if that should be something that we should be looking into in the future, or if that's the Board of Ed that needs to look into that. But I think it should be on our radar that this will be coming soon, so we don't get surprised, kind of like we did with the pool liner. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Certainly appropriate question, Mr. Walsh, and I know there is a replacement fund, or was supposed to be a replacement fund for a portion of that. It's my understanding there's not an enormous amount of money in that account at this point. So it is likely that there's going to need to be some funding for that at some point. And so I think it is appropriate that we think about that, certainly in the back of our mind. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from members of the council? No? Okay. Seeing none, I really don't have anything to say about it either, other than, to any concern about the widening of Cornwall Extension. That is in year 5. There's a lot that can happen between now and then. I am very confident a lot of things may come onto this 5-year budget between now and then, and things may go off the budget between now and then. And I'm very confident, as now serving for 7 years or so, that what you see today beyond the year that we're voting on right now may not be what you see tomorrow. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot more dialogue about what happens between year 2 and year 5 in our capital budget. So if anyone's concerned about what's in that area, we have a lot more time for that discussion. So thank you for bringing that up, Tim and David. If there's no other questions or comments, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. We can now move on to item 4, which is approval of submission of referendum questions and authorization for explanatory text. Mr. Barry.
Mr. Chairman, the Budget Committee earlier recommended, I'm going to read the motion, or the beginning of it. It's on page 50 and 51 of our packet we were sent. So be it resolved that the Town Council approves Resolution 062320-3, resolved that the resolution is entitled Resolution Appropriating $1.4 million for HVAC and locker room improvements at police station and authorizing the issuance of $1.4 million bonds of the town to meet said appropriation and pending issuance thereof, making the temporary borrowings of such purpose. Resolution appropriating $1.6 million for road improvement program on authorizing the issuance of $1.6 million bonds for the town to meet said appropriation and pending the issuance thereof, the making of temporary borrowings for such purpose. And resolution appropriating $620,000 for road reconstruction of Industrial Avenue and authorizing the issuance of $620,000 bonds of the town to meet said appropriation and pending the issuance thereof, the making of temporary borrowings for such purpose, adopted by the Town Council on tonight, June 23rd, 2020, be submitted to the town electors for approval or disapproval at a referendum on November 3rd, 2020, between the hours of 6 a.m. and 8 p.m., and that the warning of said referendum shall state the question to be voted upon as follows. Do you want me to read that, or is it legible?
That's your call, Mr. Barry. I don't think you need to, but that's your call if you feel more comfortable.
I think the part I read is a summary of the detail of the law. So.
Correct. Is everybody comfortable with that? Okay, so with that, is there a second?
I will second.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Back to you, Mr. Barry.
Mr. Chairman, it's nice that our town charter allows the council the leeway to take care of housekeeping type items and only need to send out to referendum for approval items that are large and significant in nature, and these three certainly fall under that category. They're over $500,000. They likely will not receive any help with funding, and therefore are significant. It's $3.6 million total that will be adding to our debt service that we're asking the residents to approve. We've had years where there's been 7 or 8 questions. I think this is a reasonable amount. It's a good form of government that allows us to take care of smaller items and ask the voters to participate in their own government by reviewing these 3 items and passing judgment on them.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. Any questions or comments from members of the council? Okay, seeing none, I think it's very self-explanatory. I'll call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. We will now move on to 5, contract negotiations in executive session. As most of you know, I will be recusing myself from this conversation. So, Mr. Slocum, I'm going to turn the rest of the meeting over to you, sir, and I will be removing myself from this meeting at this time. Thank you all for your participation in the budget process, and have a great night.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good night. Then I will ask for a motion to move into executive session to discuss contract negotiations. That meeting is to include the town manager and,
Arnett and then Bill Volker and Jerry Sitka are also on.
okay, that's sufficient. I don't have to repeat that.
So
Okay.
moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 We're in executive session. There'll be no action being taken, no vote after this meeting, so we'll essentially come out and adjourn at this conclusion. Okay,
All right, let's just wait for Mike, I think, to give us
Yep.
the green.